Thanks a lot, and thanks. It's nice to share the podium with Bart. I've been It's nice to share the podium with Bart. I've been fortunate to join those calls, and he runs a nice call, and the patients really seem to appreciate it and learn a lot. Sometimes I get the picture that he doesn't even need us. He's heard every complication and probably can solve 90% of them without the need of the surgeon. I've been asked to give an update on maintenance of certification. Sometimes it's something that inflames passions. It certainly has in the last few years. If you feel like you need to hurl your bran muffin at somebody responsible, you could try to hit me, but there's about 10 current or former directors in the audience, and there's actually 3 former chairs of the American Board of Thoracic Surgery, Dr. Pomerantz from 97 to 99, Dr. Perolero from 2001 to 2003, and Rick Fines from 2007 to 2009, part of our group here at General Thoracic Surgical Club, so there's probably a closer target than me if you really feel the need. In the beginning, the specialty boards were set out to try to regulate the knowledge and the skills of different specialties. Otolaryngology, OBGYN, dermatology started in the 20s. The Advisory Board of Medical Specialties was a way of kind of linking those together and trying to standardize practices, and that was organized in 1933. It's subsequently become the American Board of Medical Specialties, and it still oversees the whole process of board certification. And it was aimed to be an independent form of self-government, so that we're not offering it up to the government to oversee what we do. We set the standards, we enforce the standards, and we are made up of members of our own community. In the 1990s, it became increasingly apparent that one lifetime certificate was probably not appropriate based on the rate of change of knowledge and skills. And so the whole notion of recertification came up, and it was variably adopted. Some boards offered grandfather clauses to people who had been board certified for a long time. Others didn't. But long and short is that in pretty much all boards now are requiring some sort of ongoing certification or maintenance of certification, and we implemented this in 2008. The rationale, really, as I mentioned, is that the practice changes. If you think about everything we've heard about today, yesterday, or Thursday if you were here, all that's new since I certified in 1999. And really, it's not really fair to think that once we've been certified that we should maintain that certification without some sort of validation or updating periodically. Our patients and their families really have a right to know that there's a standard that's being upheld, and so the boards, the community of ABMS boards, try to offer that opportunity to set a standard, to allow practitioners to reach that standard, and then to allow them to be identified as such, identified to their hospital, and also if your patients look you up on the ABMS website, they could learn about your board certification status. It's not the only thing, and in fact, it's often been put out, particularly in the last few years where it's been a bit more contentious, that board certification is voluntary. I mean, it's something that you seek out to do to demonstrate your knowledge initially, and also your ability to keep up. And there's other things like maintenance of licensure, that has other requirements that you must fulfill, and ongoing professional practice evaluation, or OPPE, which is often a hospital-based process that oversees your activities and your outcomes. But maintenance certification is just one part of that, and it's a voluntary part, although critics have said that in many institutions or many states there has been an expectation that it has made it a de facto requirement, and that may be the case in some circumstances, but it was originally held out to be a mark of distinction that people would seek voluntarily to demonstrate their competence. Currently, across the American Board of Medical Specialties and also in the osteopathic equivalent, there's a mirror image process that goes on in the osteopathic community that has the same 4 parts. There's professional standing, which includes licensure, as well as your hospital membership and some sort of acknowledgement of your standing at that hospital by the hospital executive and a peer. There's a commitment to lifelong learning, which is essentially CME. Cognitive expertise, which in the past has been an examination and is gradually changing across the whole spectrum of ABMS boards. And then the evaluation of performance and practice, which has been the most recent addition to the whole certification and recertification process. So for those that are ABTS certified, what do you have to do? So, there are milestones, and the way that we've organized it at the ABTS is there's 5-year and a 10-year milestone, and it begins 5 years after your initial certification, and then it's just an iterative process for as long as you stay in practice and retain your board certification. When you're nearing the 5-year milestone, or when the board contacts you to remind you that you're nearing the 5 or 10-year milestone, you would touch bases. You would check in. Your assistant would send a letter of your intention to be part of this 5-year or 10-year milestone. You'd get a letter from your hospital, a letter from a peer. You'd provide some sort of a case summary of what type of practice what you do in your clinical practice. The ABMS, overseeing all of the 24 member boards, has set a standard for having some sort of a safety course, and they're all over the place, and they're very easy to enroll and take part in. I did mine on the way home from the STS this year. It's a STS-based e-learning, and it was quite straightforward to take part in. And then you have to briefly describe a QA or QI process that you're involved in. And then once you've done that, that kind of initial registration with the board, then you'll get back the ability to either take part in CSATs, the self-assessment activity for thoracic surgery, or a online version of an examination, which is a new attribute to the board process as of 2015. And then you complete either CSATs or the online examination, and then you're good to go for the next period of time. There have been a lot of trends, though, recently, and the trends have been accelerated by a lot of irate board-certified physicians in a lot of different specialties. But I would summarize the trends that number one on the chopping block has been the 10-year high-stakes examination, where you go into a Pearson test center and they do a retinal scan and a fingerprint and a DNA swab and take away all your equipment and knowledge, or your phones and everything like that, and just make you take a 3-hour examination and then tell you 8 weeks later that you either passed or failed. Everybody hated that, and so that's pretty much gone unless you choose to do it in some boards. There's more frequent checking in, so you don't sort of go covert. There's also more frequent paying, which is another reason for people to be irate. But the whole idea is to have it be ongoing and continuous certification, rather than we'll contact you in 9.5 years and see how things are going. The connectedness of the internet allows us to do the testing now that replaces the 10-year high-stakes examination in your office or in your home in a secure way that is much more convenient and is done on your schedule without any need for travel or lost time. And there's a lot of collaboration now with the STS or the AATS or other organizations for content, whereas in the previous era of MOC, some of the boards were actually selling the content to the diplomats, which was a bit of a conflict, that they would set a standard and then offer to sell the solution to the standard to the diplomat, which also was a source of inflammation. And then we also, the ABTS as well as other boards have public members, people who are not board certified and are not physicians or surgeons, but they're there to help with the decision making and the planning for the activities of the board. So of those activities, one of the biggest ones has been the dumping or the elimination of the 10-year high-stakes examination, and really the ABTS was first to prize here in getting rid of this. And in 2015, those who were doing their 10-year recertification were the first to be able to take part in this, where you would log on to the computer with your code, hold up your driver's license, and the computer had to have a little camera, and it would take a picture of you and for later verification. And then you would go through an examination. And the examination was not just a high-stakes assessment of your knowledge, but it was a way to give you some information about a case that was pertinent to your practice, allow you to think about it, and if you wanted to, you could look up in a textbook at your desk or go on the internet, solve a problem the way you would solve a clinical problem in your practice, take your best answer, and then it would show you the critique that was written to teach you, and then you would have another shot at the question, and then you could move on. And so it would keep track of how many people got it right on the first try, how many people got it right after reading the critique, and how long you took. And so those were the metrics that we would use to see how people did, and people did really well. I mean, they, with the exception of a few people, there's always a few people, but with the exception of a few people, people really did well. There were some people that got 100% because they really read the critiques and they learned something, because the questions were picked to be something that was pertinent to your clinical practice. Just recently, the American Board of Surgery has done this. This comes from an email that just came out, and so they're coming on board with that. Instead of a 5-year, 100-question rotation, they have a 2-year, 40-question rotation, but still the same idea that you can pick which field that you want to be quizzed in or updated in, depending on how you view it, and that would be appropriately linked with your practice. And right now there's a lot of social media stuff going on about the people who have opinions about this, but I think in general it's a move to try to lessen the burden on the diplomat by keeping them from having to go to a Pearson test center and pay that fee and take the time out of their practice. And sometimes if they couldn't book the right one, they would have to go to some more distant city. And it was really a source of inconvenience. The anesthesiologists in the American Board of Anesthesiology, they went one step further. Instead of having every 2 years or every 5 years, they do it sort of continuously. You have 30 questions per calendar quarter, up to 120 questions a year, and they just would limit how many you could do in one day. They didn't want you to sit down and do all 120 questions in one day. They want it to be a continuous process, and this has just been in process for a few years. I haven't heard any initial feedback, but again, a way of eliminating the long silence followed by cramming and preparation and anxiety about a high-stakes examination. Ophthalmology picked a middle ground of quarterly questions, a very similar strategy, and I found a very happy ophthalmologist extolling the virtues of the quarterly questions to colleagues. And so I think that this holds great promise in trying to improve the acceptability of this whole process of maintenance of certification. There have been, I think in the field of medicine in particular, and maybe cardiology in most particular, there have been people who have been unhappy with this. This was from last year, and already, for many boards, some of the demands by the American College of Gastroenterology president have already been met, and I'm certain that with the American Board of Internal Medicine, they'll be kind of changing their practices in a way that would be acceptable even to this physician who's trying to angle things in favor of their diplomats. There are people who are pretty unhappy, and there's no difficulty finding them on the internet. Take a moment to kind of read the description here. So they're describing me and the other 10 board members or former board members who are in the room. What's different, I think, in the ABTS that you got to remember is that we're all volunteers. I'm in the and right now I'm in the 8th year, actually the 9th year of my volunteer service to the American Board of Thoracic Surgery. And if you add the 3 years that I volunteered as a consultant, I'm in the 11th or 12th year of volunteer service. At that rate, to get the 1.1 million, I have to go for infinity years in order to catch up with the president and CEO of the American Board of Family Medicine. So really the vast majority of the work that gets done in the board is volunteer work, and some of the allegations of these folks enriching themselves by inflicting requirements on their peers and then charging them, I think is a bit overstated. You would think that there would be a rush for the turnstiles to get out if people were that unhappy. And there's a description in this article on Netscape that there was an increase in attrition of people no longer seeking recertification as a result of dissatisfaction or the increased burden and requirements of maintenance of certification. But even though they claim that there is an impact, 4.9% between 90 and 95, up to 5.7% in 96 to 2000 doesn't seem like a huge signal to me. And if you think that all of us spend about 25 to 30 years in practice, you would expect anywhere from 3 to 4% of us hanging it up at any given year. And if you were getting close to your recertification or maintenance of certification deadline and you were kind of in that range, I could see you would be kind of weighing the pros and cons of going through another cycle. But so it doesn't seem like there's a huge signal there of people who are so dissatisfied with MOC that they're choosing not to do it. And across the whole American Board of Medical Specialties, there really is an acknowledgement that maybe things 4 or 5 years ago had gotten too onerous, too burdensome. And so there is a commission that is being formed just to look at it from the top down. And that, as far as I know, that commission has just been named, and they're just going to start rolling up their sleeves and digging into some of the issues. And there may be an opportunity for all of us to kind of voice our opinion about how maintenance certification ought to change in order to keep it relevant, but not excessively expensive or burdensome. There are other boards, and I hold out the American Osteopathic Association as being really a parallel universe to the American Board of Medical Specialties. There's a slide that I've left out, but if you show them in parallel, there's the same 4 elements of MOC. There's a very similar expense. There's a similar frequency with which the iterative processes take place. So it's really almost the same thing for osteopaths. The other 3 are really basically groups that were dissatisfied or disgruntled with the ABMS and are trying to pick a cheaper, easier alternative to say that they're fulfilling maintenance of certification. The last one, I can only find one citing of it on the internet, and apparently other people, and you might also have received letters from them, and I'm not quite sure what they actually do, but they've got a manifesto all in capitals. I'd be happy to show you later. So it's the kind of the text equivalent of shouting for the whole thing. Just basically saying that they are like the tens of thousands of others who think that recertification is a crime and they're not going to stand for it. But the other 2 are legitimate organizations that are trying to offer an alternative, and part of their sales pitch is that they're describing a so-called grassroots rebellion across many states in which MOC is being rendered illegal. And I happen to see that Missouri was on, this was an email I just got this week from Paul Tierstein, who leads the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. I saw that Missouri was on the list, and I actually wrote my emailed my state representative, because she emails me all the time. I emailed her back and asked her, what about this? And apparently there was a law passed in 2016 in Missouri that I read it several times, and I still don't understand exactly what it says it talked about both maintenance of licensure and maintenance of certification, and it just says that Missouri is not going to compel people to be board certified to practice medicine in Missouri. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like a real threat to maintenance of certification as far as I could tell. And then there was another attempted bill in 2017 in Missouri to change the language a little bit and perhaps to kind of maybe tighten down on MOC, but that got stranded in committee like a lot of these other states. There's a lot of bills that got launched and then are stranded in committee. So the grassroots rebellion is there, but I don't see a huge change in the execution of maintenance and certification in response to the grassroots rebellion, as much as I see a change in it in response to reasonable feedback from diplomats who are participating in it. There was an antitrust suit brought against physicians by one of the upstart boards that was dismissed, and I found this very interesting opinion from Darrell Wyman. I don't know if anyone knows Dr. Wyman. He's a thoracic surgeon. He has nothing to do with the Board of Thoracic Surgery, but he does point out that sometimes it may appear that doing away with the recertification process is really something that is done by some physicians in the interest of making their lives easier rather than trying to maintain certain standards. The people that claim that maintenance certification is too expensive and doesn't do anything, they really only address the too expensive part by saying we can have some process that is cheaper and easier than what the ABMS is doing. They don't try to make it harder or better. They just try to make it cheaper and easier. So I think that there's more to discuss about this, but I would think that maintaining a high level and trying to be thoughtful about the cost would be a middle ground to shoot for. So in summary, maintenance of certification continues to evolve. There's no immediate evolutions on the horizon for the American Board of Thoracic Surgeons, but we're open to feedback and involvement in the community of board-certified thoracic surgeons. There's been a lot of response to concerns and criticisms in the past 4 or 5 years. And I think there's openness by the ABMS and the community of member boards to continue to hone it and tweak it accordingly. A few years ago, when John Calhoun was the chair, there was a letter sent out to department and division heads looking for volunteers or recommendations for participation in the board. Last year, under Cam Wright, there was a letter sent out asking surgeons to self-volunteer. And that actually, there was about 48 people that responded, and of those 48 people, 3 of them are now on the board as of last fall, and 10 of them are going to be helping with oral boards this spring, and another, I think 3 or 4 are going to be invited as consultants. So we do listen to the self-nominations, and so if you want to be part of the solution, then there's a mechanism to do that as well. So. Thanks a lot.